People often say not to judge a book by its cover, yet that's exactly what we do every single day. It's easy. It's fast. We make snap assumptions based on how someone looks, dresses, or carries themselves. We think we can read their story in an instant. When that woman walked into the room with a uniform that looked tired, faded, and worn out, people saw what they wanted to see, not what was really there. To them, it was a sign of carelessness, of someone who didn't take pride in presentation. What they didn't realize was that the fabric of that uniform carried more weight, more pain, and more pride than any crisp, pressed jacket ever could. That single moment, the laughter, the whispers, the judgment, was a perfect reflection of how society tends to value appearance over authenticity. We live in a culture that rewards surface polish. We've trained ourselves to trust what looks impressive and dismiss what doesn't. But behind every worn sleeve, every faded patch, every scar or wrinkle, there's a story that can't be seen from the outside. That uniform, in its worn state, was a record of service. It had been through rain, dust, heat, and time. It had witnessed exhaustion, courage, and endurance. It was more than clothing, it was testimony. Judgment based on appearance is not always born of cruelty. Sometimes it comes from habit, sometimes from ignorance, sometimes from the fear of confronting something real. The irony is that the same people who mocked her would probably post quotes about never judging others or honoring heroes. It's easy to say those things when the hero looks clean and photogenic. But what happens when the hero shows up unfiltered, with dirt under their nails, a uniform that's seen too much, and eyes that have seen more than words can describe? Suddenly, admiration turns to discomfort. People don't know how to react to authenticity when it doesn't come wrapped in presentation. In that room, the worn uniform became a mirror. It reflected how shallow our standards can be. It showed how quick we are to rank people without knowing a single truth about them. Society often connects appearance with worth, as if dignity depends on fabric and color rather than on action and integrity. Yet the world's real stories of courage and resilience rarely come dressed for the spotlight. They come in faded cotton, scuffed boots, and quiet faces that don't demand attention. Judging her uniform wasn't just about fabric. It was about misunderstanding value. When someone has served, when they've put themselves through hardship, sacrifice, and fear, their clothing becomes part of that journey. It's not about style, it's about survival. The creases, the stains, the frayed edges, each one speaks. Each one carries memory. The act of mocking it, even unconsciously, is an act of dismissing that memory. It's not the uniform that's being insulted, it's everything that uniform has endured. The tragedy is that many people never look past the surface long enough to see this. They categorize and move on, never realizing the depth of what they've missed. We see it everywhere, in classrooms, in workplaces, in public spaces. The assumptions are constant. This person must be lazy, that one must be uneducated, this one must be arrogant, that one must be weak. We paint entire human beings with the brush of appearance, never pausing to ask what stories their worn uniforms might tell. When we judge, we reveal more about ourselves than about the person we're judging. The people in that room didn't know her, didn't know the unit she'd served with, didn't know the moments that had shaped her. All they saw was something they considered imperfect. That says more about their definition of perfection than about her worth. And yet, if they had stopped for a moment to ask why the uniform looked the way it did, they might have learned something profound. They might have understood that wear and tear can be a sign of service, not neglect. They might have realized that pride sometimes hides in humility, in choosing not to replace the old with the new because the old has meaning. They might have seen that real honor doesn't shine, it endures. Appearance has always been a deceptive storyteller. It seduces us into believing we understand a person when we've barely begun to look. But the truth is, the most powerful stories are invisible, written in sweat, in struggle, in persistence that doesn't advertise itself. That uniform was a chapter of someone's life that could only be read by those who cared enough to look closely. And for those who didn't, the lesson was lost the moment they laughed. A uniform is more than just a piece of clothing. It's a symbol, a language made of fabric, color, and insignia. Every thread carries meaning, every patch tells a story, and every crease holds a memory of what someone has gone through while wearing it. When people looked at her worn uniform and dismissed it as shabby, they didn't just insult her appearance. They dismissed the power of what that uniform represented. They saw only fabric, but that uniform was history, commitment, and identity all stitched together. The power of symbols lies in their quiet strength. They don't have to shout to command respect. They remind us of something larger than ourselves, of duty, of sacrifice, of belonging. A soldier's uniform, for instance, is a promise made visible. It stands for the values that person swore to uphold, even when no one is watching. But when a symbol becomes too familiar, people stop seeing it. They stop recognizing its weight. The uniform turns invisible, reduced to just another outfit, until someone reminds them of its meaning. That's what happened when the Brigadier General read the unit tag. In that small moment, everything changed. The laughter stopped, the air shifted, and silence fell over the room. Because suddenly, what looked ordinary became sacred again. The unit tag carried more than just letters and numbers. It carried a legacy. That tiny patch represented a group of people who had stood in places most of us could never imagine. It represented moments of fear, courage, and loss. It was the emblem of a chapter in history that had demanded everything from those who wore it. Symbols like that are powerful because they connect the past to the present. They remind us that what we see today is built on the shoulders of what came before. When someone wears a uniform, they're not just representing themselves. They're carrying the weight of every person who ever wore it before them. It's a form of continuity, a bridge between generations. The colors might fade, the fabric might fray, but the meaning doesn't disappear. In fact, sometimes the wear and tear make it stronger, more authentic, more human. People often confuse newness with value. A crisp, clean uniform looks professional and commands instant respect. But a worn one, with faded patches and stretched seams, often tells the truer story. It's the story of time spent in the field, of sweat and rain and sleepless nights. It's the story of endurance. To those who understand the language of uniforms, those signs of wear are like badges of honor. They say, "I've been there. I've done the work. I've lived it." But to the untrained eye, they might just look like flaws. That's the danger of forgetting what symbols stand for. We start to misread the signs. The uniform's power doesn't come from perfection. It comes from purpose. It isn't meant to impress. It's meant to serve. When people see a soldier, a nurse, a firefighter, or anyone in uniform, they often see the role, not the reality. They forget that behind every uniform is a person who chose to dedicate themselves to something beyond comfort or convenience. The uniform becomes their second skin, a daily reminder of their oath. And when that uniform shows wear, it's because it has fulfilled its duty. The unit tag in particular holds a kind of sacred authority. It's small, often overlooked, but within it lives identity, not of one individual, but of a collective. It tells where that person has been, who they stood beside, and what missions define them. It's the mark that binds them to others, even those they've never met. When the Brigadier General recognized it, he wasn't just seeing a patch. He was seeing history. He was seeing courage and loss and triumph intertwined. That recognition transformed the room because it reawakened the understanding that a symbol, no matter how small, carries immense emotional gravity. When people insulted her uniform, they were, without realizing it, rejecting that entire language of meaning. They were treating a story like a surface. It's easy to laugh when you don't understand the context. But when context appears, laughter dies fast. That's the nature of powerful symbols. They demand respect once their truth is known. The uniform didn't change that day, the perception did. And that shift came from understanding what the unit tag stood for. Symbols exist all around us, but their power depends on recognition. When we forget what they stand for, they lose their hold on us. But the moment someone remembers, the moment someone looks deeper, that power floods back. A worn uniform, a faded flag, a scarred hand, they're all reminders of something sacred. They speak to commitment, sacrifice, and endurance in a way words rarely can. The uniform wasn't just fabric, it was living proof that meaning doesn't fade even when colors do. Respect is often mistaken for admiration of appearance. People think respect belongs to those who look the part, the ones with polished shoes, crisp collars, and perfect posture. But real respect isn't about polish, it's about purpose. It's about what someone stands for, what they've done, and what they've endured when no one was watching. The woman in the worn uniform didn't walk in seeking approval. She didn't need applause or validation. She was simply wearing the same uniform that had carried her through countless days of service, days that most people in that room could never imagine. Yet, they judged her. They saw wrinkles where there was endurance, fading where there was experience, and where there was meaning. That reaction reveals how deeply conditioned people are to equate appearance with worth. From an early age, we're told to look sharp, present ourselves well, and make good first impressions. Those lessons are valuable in many ways, but they can also blind us to the truth that the neatest surface often hides the least struggle. A perfectly ironed uniform might catch the eye, but it doesn't necessarily carry the weight of real experience. A worn uniform, on the other hand, speaks quietly of persistence, long days, and duty fulfilled without complaint. Respect should be earned by purpose, by what someone contributes, not by how they look while doing it. A soldier who spent weeks in the field won't have the luxury of looking immaculate. Their clothes might be dusty, their boots scuffed, their hands rough. But each of those marks tells a story of purpose. It shows they've been where comfort ends and commitment begins. Yet too often, society overlooks that. We reward appearances and overlook the people who've given everything without fanfare. We confuse shine with strength. That moment when the brigadier general stepped forward was more than a correction of a misunderstanding. It was a redefinition of respect. When he looked at the unit tag, he didn't see faded fabric. He saw sacrifice. He saw purpose made visible through wear. In that instant, everyone else in the room was forced to confront what they had missed. That respect belongs to those who serve with intention, not those who merely look prepared. True respect isn't something you can see from the outside. It's something you feel when you understand the story behind the surface. The polished and the perfect are easy to admire because they make us comfortable. They fit our idea of control and order. But real purpose often looks messy. It's worn down, tested, and imperfect. It carries the marks of time and effort. When people judge someone by appearance, they often turn away from the very proof of purpose they claim to respect. The irony is that the things we dismiss as flaws, the creases, the wear, the signs of fatigue, are exactly what give something or someone authenticity. They're evidence of a life lived with intention. Respecting purpose means seeing beyond the obvious. It means understanding that the real measure of worth is not how well someone maintains appearances, but how much they contribute when appearances no longer matter. In the military, respect is supposed to be about what's been done, missions completed, values upheld, people protected. Yet even there, the instinct to judge by sight still creeps in. That's a human flaw. We all have it. But moments like this one remind us how small that instinct can make us look when exposed. There's a certain humility in recognizing purpose over polish. It requires stepping outside our comfort zone and admitting that what we thought was impressive might not matter as much as we believed. It means valuing the worn-out boots that walk through hardship more than the shiny ones that never left the pavement. It means realizing that dignity doesn't depend on presentation, but on persistence. The people who truly deserve respect are often the ones least concerned with being noticed. They do their work, carry their weight, and move forward quietly. Their uniforms wear down, their bodies tire, but their purpose doesn't fade. That's the kind of respect that lasts. It's not about being impressed for a moment. It's about being moved by understanding. When the brigadier general recognized her unit tag, he wasn't reacting to status or rank. He was responding to purpose. He knew what that tag meant. He knew what kind of missions those soldiers had faced. He knew what it cost to wear that particular uniform into certain places and come back alive. Respect, in that sense, isn't admiration. It's acknowledgement. It's saying, I see what you've done. I understand what it took. Purpose is what gives anything its true value. Without it, polish is just decoration. And yet, because purpose is invisible, people often overlook it. They forget that the things worth respecting in life, courage, loyalty, endurance, integrity, don't sparkle. They don't announce themselves. They exist quietly, written into the way someone carries themselves, the way they show up, the way they keep going even when no one's watching. The worn uniform was never meant to impress. It was meant to serve, to protect, to endure. And in that quiet endurance lay more honor than any perfectly pressed fabric could ever hold. Leadership is often measured by how much power a person holds, how well they command attention, or how sharply they wear their rank. But true leadership isn't about any of that. It's about perception, the ability to see beyond the surface, to recognize value where others overlook it, and to honor substance over show. When the brigadier general stepped forward that day, he didn't just correct a misunderstanding. He demonstrated what leadership looks like when it's rooted in respect, awareness, and empathy. He saw something everyone else missed. While others saw a worn-out uniform, he saw evidence of service, sacrifice, and silent strength. That moment didn't just shift the room's tone. It revealed the difference between authority and leadership. Authority demands attention. Leadership earns it. The brigadier general's reaction wasn't about defending someone out of politeness. It came from understanding. He knew what that unit tag meant. He knew the history tied to it, the missions carried out by those who wore it, the pain and endurance behind that symbol. His recognition was instinctive, born from experience. He'd probably stood where she once stood, faced similar trials, and carried his own worn fabric through seasons of hardship. That's why he didn't need an explanation. He just knew. And that's what separates leaders from bystanders. Leaders don't need the whole story to understand its weight. Leadership that recognizes service over show is rare because it requires humility. It means accepting that the truest forms of greatness are often quiet. They don't perform for validation. They don't seek recognition. They just exist, steady and consistent, in the work that gets done every day. The people mocking the uniform that day weren't malicious. They were unaware. Their view of value was limited to appearances, to things that could be easily seen. The brigadier general's perspective went deeper. He didn't need the uniform to be perfect to respect it. He respected what it stood for. He saw the purpose that gave it meaning. That's the kind of leadership that transforms environments. It doesn't shout or boast. It doesn't need to. Instead, it observes, listens, and acknowledges what others miss. It lifts people up by recognizing their worth without making them ask for it. The power of that kind of leadership lies in the small gestures, a nod, a word, a moment of recognition that says, "I see you, and I know what you've done." Those moments might seem minor to outsiders, but to the person being seen, they mean everything. They restore dignity. They remind people that their effort matters, even when it goes unnoticed by most. The world has plenty of people who can lead through command, but very few can lead through recognition. It's easy to demand respect. It's much harder to give it where it's deserved, but uncelebrated it. Leadership built on recognition changes the culture of a team, an organization, even a room. It reminds everyone that contribution matters more than display. It breaks down hierarchies built on image and replaces them with ones built on mutual respect. The brigadier general's quiet gesture did more to teach that room about leadership than any speech could have. He didn't need to explain why he respected her. The weight of his silence after reading the tag said it all. In that silence, everyone else realized how much they had missed. They saw that leadership isn't about demanding people to look a certain way or act a certain way. It's about recognizing the truth behind what's visible. The woman's uniform told a story, and the general was fluent in that language. He saw the miles it had traveled, the hardships it had endured, and the courage it symbolized. His respect wasn't conditional on how it looked. It was unconditional because of what it represented. That's what separates genuine leaders from those who just occupy leadership roles. Genuine leaders don't use their position to elevate themselves. They use it to elevate others. They notice the details others overlook. They understand that sometimes the most meaningful contributions come from people who don't stand in the spotlight. They know that a wrinkled uniform can carry more honor than a brand new one. And when they see someone being dismissed unfairly, they don't stay silent. They step forward, not to make a scene, but to set an example. Leadership that recognizes service over show is a kind of moral clarity. It cuts through pretense and sees essence. It values deeds over decorations, heart over hierarchy. In the military, that kind of leadership is especially vital because it reminds everyone that ranks may define roles, but respect defines relationships. The brigadier general's action that day wasn't about asserting authority. It was about reminding people what authority is for, to protect dignity, to honor effort, to defend what deserves respect. His single act turned judgment into awareness, mockery into silence, and misunderstanding into respect. That's what true leadership does. It doesn't need attention to prove itself. It proves itself by paying attention. The unit tag on her shoulder was small, almost unnoticeable. Most people in the room didn't look close enough to read it. To them, it was just another piece of fabric, part of the uniform's design. But for those who understand what those tags mean, it was everything. It was identity. It was history. It was a quiet record of courage, sacrifice, and belonging that can't be seen from the outside. The brigadier general didn't see a piece of cloth. He saw a legacy. And in that moment, the entire atmosphere shifted from ridicule to reverence, all because of a few letters stitched onto a worn sleeve. Every unit tag carries a story. It connects individuals to the people who came before them and the ones who will come after. It represents not just a group, but a lineage of shared struggle, triumph, and endurance. Soldiers wear those tags with pride because they remind them that they're part of something larger than themselves. They are part of a living history that keeps growing with every act of service. The worn edges of that patch were not a sign of neglect. They were proof of life, of the missions, the training, the fieldwork, the moments that tested strength and courage. To the untrained eye, those symbols mean little. But to those who've served, they're sacred. They mark where someone has been, what they've endured, and who they've stood beside. They're a silent language that doesn't need to be spoken. The brigadier general could read that language instantly. He didn't need an introduction or an explanation. The tag told him everything. The unit, its history, its reputation, and the weight that came with wearing it. That's why his reaction was immediate. He knew what kind of story that patch held, and that story demanded respect. The power of that moment came from recognition. Everyone else in the room saw a worn uniform and made assumptions. The general saw the same thing, but understood its meaning. That's the difference between perception and understanding. He saw that the faded patch wasn't just part of her uniform. It was part of her identity. It represented nights in harsh weather, missions completed under pressure, and the kind of loyalty that never asks for praise. It represented brothers and sisters in arms, some of whom might not have made it back. That kind of meaning doesn't wash off with time. It stays, embedded in every thread. The story behind the unit tag was a story of legacy and honor. Every unit has its own code, its own traditions, and its own way of building strength through shared experience. When you wear that insignia, you carry every moment that defined the people who wore it before you. You carry their victories, their losses, their lessons. You're not just representing yourself. You're representing everyone who came through that same path. That's why the brigadier general reacted the way he did. He wasn't just recognizing one soldier. He was recognizing an entire unit, an entire lineage of service that the rest of the room had overlooked. What's powerful about symbols like the unit tag is how quietly they hold meaning. They don't need to be explained to those who know. There's a kind of reverence that exists within that understanding, an unspoken connection between people who have lived through the same experiences. It's a language of respect built not on words, but on recognition. When he read that tag, the general wasn't seeing a rank or a name. He was seeing everything that name represented. He was seeing long marches, lost friends, moments of fear and courage that shaped soldiers forever. He was seeing the weight of that uniform and the pride that came with it. Legacy is built this way. through symbols that seem small but carry worlds within them. The worn tag on her sleeve connected her to a chapter of history, one written not in ink, but in service. The laughter in that room faded because people suddenly realized they weren't looking at an old uniform anymore. They were looking at a piece of heritage, a fragment of something too significant to be mocked. The realization was quiet but heavy, like a truth that had been sitting in plain sight all along, waiting for someone to see it clearly. Honor doesn't always announce itself. It often hides in small details, a scar, a medal, a faded patch. Those who know. Those who don't, overlook it until someone reminds them. That's what the Brigadier General did that day. He didn't lecture or correct. He simply revealed the truth that was already there. He gave that moment back its meaning. The people who had laughed were suddenly confronted with the weight of what they had mocked. And all it took was the reading of a unit tag to remind them that what they thought was worn-out cloth was actually a badge of legacy and pride. Humility is one of those qualities people talk about but rarely practice. It's easy to speak about respect, compassion, and understanding, but humility requires more than words. It demands awareness, the ability to pause before judging, to see value where others see none, to listen instead of assume. In that room, when people mocked the woman's worn uniform, humility was missing. The laughter came from arrogance disguised as confidence. It came from people so sure of their own sense of what respectable looked like that they couldn't recognize dignity standing right in front of them. Then, the Brigadier General looked closer, read the unit tag, and everything stopped. That moment was humility forcing its way back into the room, reminding everyone that what arrogance overlooks, humility understands. Arrogance moves fast. It judges before thinking. It's loud and sure of itself, eager to prove superiority. Humility moves slowly. It observes first, waits, and seeks to understand before forming an opinion. The people who mocked her didn't pause long enough to see the meaning in her appearance. To them, the uniform was worn, therefore she was careless. They filled the silence with assumptions instead of questions. They looked at her through a narrow lens, shaped by comfort and pride. But the general's pause, that single moment of observation, was everything. He looked where others didn't, and because he did, he saw what arrogance couldn't. Humility sees beyond polish. It doesn't need perfection to recognize worth. It doesn't need titles, ranks, or appearances to determine who deserves respect. The Brigadier General's reaction came from humility grounded in experience. He had likely worn uniforms just like hers, ones that had seen exhaustion, hardship, and time. He knew that every stain, every crease, every faded line carried a story. His humility allowed him to see that truth instantly, while others missed it completely. That's the power of humility. It gives you eyes to see what's real, not just what's visible. What arrogance overlooks is usually what matters most. The people who laughed that day thought they were noticing flaws. They thought they were being observant. But observation without understanding isn't insight. It's blindness in disguise. Arrogance makes people believe they know the whole story after seeing just a fragment. Humility reminds us that every person carries experiences invisible to the eye. The general didn't have to ask for her history. He recognized it through symbols, through the quiet language of service. He didn't assume, he understood. That's the divide between arrogance and humility. One sees only surfaces, the other reads depth. Humility is also courage. It takes courage to admit that you might be wrong, to acknowledge that you don't know everything, to give respect before it's proven. The people who mocked her lacked that courage. They hid behind their certainty. They believed they were above her because their clothes were cleaner, their presentation sharper. But humility doesn't measure worth by comparison. It measures worth by truth. It knows that greatness can wear dust, and honor can come wrapped in imperfection. When the general read that unit tag, humility won. Not because he embarrassed the others, but because he let truth speak for itself. Arrogance thrives in comfort. It grows in rooms where people assume they already understand the world. Humility thrives in awareness. It grows in those who've seen enough to know how little they actually know. The Brigadier General didn't need to prove his authority that day. He demonstrated it through restraint. He let his silence do the teaching. That's the quiet force of humility. It doesn't demand attention, but it commands respect when it appears. In that moment, everyone saw what it meant to truly look beyond themselves. They saw that humility isn't weakness. It's wisdom. There's a kind of blindness that comes with arrogance. It convinces people that surface impressions are truth. It closes their minds to deeper meaning. The laughter in that room was born from that blindness. But when humility entered through the general's recognition, it broke that illusion. Suddenly, the worn uniform wasn't an eyesore, it was a story. The whispers stopped, and everyone saw what they should have seen from the beginning. A person who had given more than they could comprehend. Humility made that possible. The most remarkable thing about humility is that it doesn't seek credit. The brigadier general didn't point fingers or deliver a speech about judgment. He simply looked, understood, and shifted the entire mood of the room. That's the essence of humility, quiet strength, guided by respect. It doesn't correct through scolding, it corrects through presence. It reveals truth by seeing it fully. When arrogance mocks, humility listens. When arrogance assumes, humility asks. When arrogance overlooks, humility recognizes. In that story, humility became the unseen hero. It reminded everyone that real respect requires more than manners. It requires understanding. It showed that wisdom isn't in speaking first, but in seeing clearly. It proved that sometimes the most powerful lessons come not from grand gestures or speeches, but from a simple act of seeing what was there all along. The woman didn't need to defend herself. The general didn't need to explain. Humility spoke for both of them, steady, quiet, undeniable.